did not really know him. He would only come for Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, etc. But for those of us who had a close relationship with him, it truly is a tremendous, tremendous loss, and it's a loss for Klal Yisrael. I quoted more than once what Rabbi Akiva said about his wife to his Talmidim. It says, "Shali v'shalochem," all of my Torah and all of your Torah, Shalah, is from her, that she enabled it. Well, we could apply a very similar idea, Shali v'shalochem, Shalo, that all of the Torah of Or Sameach, which has been in operation for more than 50 years and has produced thousands and thousands of Talmidim who themselves have built families and children and grandchildren and themselves have become rabbis and teachers throughout the world. It all comes from his guiding spirits. And so I have no particular dedication in front of me today, but I would like to dedicate this year Le'ilui Nishmato. And Yehi Zichro Baruch. I mean, again, as I say, the impact that he has had on thousands and tens of thousands of people over the years is really unbelievable. And the interesting thing is, he's the last of a generation of kind of who started what's called the Baal Tshuva movement after the Six Day War. There was Rav Noach Weinberg, there was Rav Yaakov Rosenberg, other people. They were Nifter. He was the last one kind of standing in that. And the idea of a yeshiva for people who are not yet religious is kind of a common idea today. Everybody does it. But 50 years ago, Chabad was doing it even 50 years ago. I'll give them credit. But other than Chabad and very few visionaries, many people thought it was crazy. The idea that you're going to try to appeal to a person who's not religious and whose parents have not been religious, what are you going to possibly do? And many people actually did think that the conservative movement in particular was going to gain traction, and more people would be attracted to it. And that's why in the 50s in particular, there were many Orthodox rabbis who went over to the conservative movement because they honestly did not think there was any future for Orthodoxy among those who left it. So what has now become a very accepted idea was a mishugas 50 years ago. And I think there's a saying from George Bernard Shaw. I don't remember the exact words, but it's something like great ideas are only brought into the world by crazy people. Because normal people look at a situation and they say, "Yeah, I can't do anything about it." It takes yeah, it is what it is. It takes a certain kind of craziness to kind of envision the way things might become and to take changes that really effect real change in the world. So he was really one of those great visionaries. So I know I'm going to miss him tremendously, and hopefully Or Sameach will continue its mission. So be it as it may, today's year is dedicated to Le'ilui Nishmato, and I'm going to take a little bit of liberty to take a break in Rambam, and I want to talk a little bit about Tanis Esther, because there are some aspects of the fast of Esther on Thursday that people are unfamiliar with, and actually it's a very interesting fast. First, when you ask anybody, why is there a fast of Esther? So they will immediately go to Megillat Esther, because once again, Haman got permission from Achashverosh to promulgate a decree of genocide. And Mordechai heard this first. Mordechai apparently heard it before Esther. It's interesting that within the palace itself, it was less known. But Mordechai heard, and Mordechai dressed in sackcloth, and Mordechai sent a message to Esther that Klal Yisrael is in danger. And indeed, one of those memorable speeches, Esther's first response was, "Can't go. What can I do? The king has not summoned me for 30 days. Anyone who comes to the king without permission just gets killed." And Mordechai gave her a memorable speech that every one of us has to think about all the time. He says, "God is going to save the Jews one way or the other. I know that. But you can either be part of it or you cannot be part of it. Mi Yodea. And who knows why you became queen? Maybe this is the whole point, why you became queen, right?" person has to realize that in many, many ways, Hashem will always save the Jewish people. But you can be, as they say, part of the solution or part of the problem. That's up to you. So Esther decreed a 3-day fast, a 3-day fast. So many say, well, Taanit Esther is a commemoration of the 3-day fast of Esther Hamalka that is recorded in the Megillah. That is the normal answer most people will say. Now, a few problems. Problem number one, which is not really a problem. Well, Esther's fast was 3 days. Why do we do it one day? Okay, not so bad. The Chachamim had mercy on you, on us. They didn't want to make a 3-day fast, so that's not so much of a question. But here's the thing: if you look at the dates of the fast of Esther, and in fact, it's very amazing. People don't realize how much Pesach was involved in the redemption of Purim. The fast was the 13th of Nisan, the 14th of Nisan, which is Erev Pesach, the 15th of Nisan, first day of Pesach. Chazal actually say that year they did not fulfill eating matzah, although there's actually a machlokas a little bit, because the Megillah actually says that the fast was Laila Viyom, night and day. So we're talking about a 72-hour fast of no food and no water for 3 days. If that's the case, as difficult as that is, you can survive, but barely as difficult as that fast is, that does mean they didn't have a Seder. They didn't eat matzah, they didn't eat maror. So some indeed understand that they did not fulfill those mitzvahs because they felt that the fast was a matter of pikuach nefesh, to save the Jewish people, and it overrides everything. However, there are some meforshim, which is not pshuto shel mikra, they actually say that of course they had a little bit of refreshments, both because of the mitzvah of Pesach, and also just because it's hard to survive. People would die. And when it says fast day and night, that just means your day fast should extend, let's say, an hour or two into the night. Afterwards, you would be allowed to eat a little bit. So that's a machlokas, how to learn Laila B'Yom. And according to that, they did the mitzvah. But be it as it may, Esther went into Achashverosh on the first day of Pesach. That is when she invited Achashverosh to her mishteh. And then she said to him, I want to make a mishteh tomorrow. That night, meaning the night of the second day of Pesach already, is when Achashverosh couldn't sleep, and Mordechai was rewarded in the morning, and the Haman let him, right? And that later that day was mishteh number 2 on the 16th of Nisan. And when was Haman hung? Haman was hung on that day. So Haman was actually killed. Haman's yortzeit is on the second day of Pesach, the 16th of Pesach. Now, the truth is, Chol HaMoed, we were not out of the water yet because there's still this decree on the 13th of Adar, the Jews are to be wiped out. You have to realize, as you read the Megillah, it's very, very clear that even the death of Haman does not take us out of our tzara. There's a whole other discussion on we had to get permission to fight, etc., etc., etc. The downfall of Haman is not the end of the story, but it's certainly the beginning of the Yeshua, and therefore, a lot of the Yeshua of Purim happened on Pesach. There's a Hasidic minhag that some Hasidim have, that on the second day of Pesach, which in Chutz La'aretz is Chol HaMoed, I'm sorry, is Yom Tov, in Eretz Yisrael is Chol HaMoed, they have a Pesach-dik hamantashen. I'm not sure what that tastes like. And they sing the Purim song Shoshanas Yaakov on Pesach itself. So here's the question. The fact that Esther's fast was 3 days and our fast is 1 day is not so much of a problem. The Chachamim didn't want to burden us with that. But Esther's fast is Nisan. Our Taanit Esther is the 13th of Adar. Why don't we fast when Esther actually fasted? So there too, there is a halachic answer, and that is, generally speaking, you are not supposed to have a fast in the month of Nisan the month of Nisan is festive. The only exception, and even that is a bit of a problem, is the fast of the firstborn. But most of the time, we get out of that fast by a siyum or whatever. But to make a regular fast day in the month of Nisan, we don't do. So we move it to Purim, which means, so according to that interpretation, Einochinami, according to that interpretation, the origin of Tainus Esther is Esther's 3-day fast. It got knocked down to 1 day, and it got moved from Nisan to Adar. That's pshat number one. But there's another pshat that the fast of Esther has nothing to do with the fast of Esther. Meaning to say, it is not the fast that Esther had 3 days in the month of Nisan, but it refers to an unrecorded fast that's not even mentioned in the text. And that is, when you go out to war, you figure that one of the things a chayal would like to do the day he goes out to war is have a good breakfast. And there may be two reasons for that. I mean, number one, you want to have energy. You don't want to, be lethargic. And number two, if God forbid it's your last meal, whatever, you want a good meal. But the Yerushalmi records that it was the minhag of Jewish soldiers, religious Jewish soldiers, before they went to war, that they would fast that day, asking Hashem for Yeshua. A little bit of a remez, a bit of an analogy of this can be found in the book of Shmuel. If you remember when Shaul, in one of Shaul's battles against the Philistines, against the Pelishtim, so Shaul decreed that no one should have te'iman, no one should taste anything until we defeat our enemies. If you remember the story, Yonasan, Shaul's own son, didn't hear this, and he had some honeycomb, and Shaul was going to carry out his law. Shaul was going to kill him because anyone who violates the king's edict is chayav misa, and it mentions that the people protested so much that they redeemed or they ransomed Yonah's son from death. So that's at least one occasion where we see that there was fasting in time of war. Now, consequently, remember the 13th of Adar was a very dangerous day. That was the day that our enemies were given permission to kill us with impunity, and we needed to defend ourselves. And theoretically, many Jews could have been killed. Baruch Hashem, nobody was killed. No Jewish person was killed that day, but they fasted. So the Taanit, that's called the Taanit of Esther, on the 13th of Adar, is a zecher to the unrecorded fast of the Jewish people on the 13th of Adar that year, which they did before the Milchama, or during the Milchama as well. So there are two different origins for Taanit Esther. Is it connected to the 3-day fast of Esther, but it was moved from Nisan to Adar, or is it connected to the fast of the 13th of Adar, which is unrecorded? Be it as it may, it's important to know that Taanit Esther is not recorded in the Mishnah, meaning as a permanent. I mean, other than the fast in the Megillah, which is a one-time thing, it is not recorded in the Mishnah. It is not recorded in the Gemara. It is, in fact, from the time of the Gaonim. It is very unusual. It is the only fast day that we observe that is post-Talmudic in nature. Yom Kippur, of course, is from the Torah. The 9th of Av and the 17th of Tammuz and the 10th of Teves and the fast of Gedalia are actually based on a pasuk in Zechariah. It comes from the time of the prophets, and the Mishnah and the Gemara discuss the halachot of those fasts. But I'll tell you, if you go through the entire Talmud, you will not find any allusion whatsoever to a permanent fast called the Fast of Esther. It came later, and it's post-Talmudic. And generally speaking, if you're familiar with the halachic system, there's relatively few Jewish practices that are after the Gemara. The Gemara was considered to be the definitive halachic text for Jewish practice. And that is why Taanit Esther, I don't want to give people carte blanche, but that's why Taanit Esther is the most lenient of all fasts. If somebody has headache or whatever it is, one can be lenient. Of course, this year, Taanit Esther in Yerushalayim is a little different because, Taanit Esther is the 13th of Adar. In most of the world, Megillah is read the 14th of Adar, so the night after Taanit Esther is Megillah reading. And lechatchila, if one is able to, one should continue the fast till after Megillah reading, if one is able to. But in Yerushalayim, we always got a break, because in Yerushalayim, Taanit Esther is the 13th, but we don't read Megillah till the 15th, so we don't have a long wait after the fast. This year, because it's Purim Mishulash, we suffer with our other brethren. And if you are able to fast, again, as I say, if it's a hardship, even on the fast itself, you can be fairly lenient. But Kal v'chomer, in the gap between nightfall and Megillah reading, you can be fairly lenient. I'm not going to be machmer, but lechatchila, if one is able to, one should this year continue the fast until some say water is permitted, some say not, but some do say water is permitted. So for sure you could be somech on that. Other than water, it's better to continue. Yeah.
So Rabbi, what you were saying before about the difference between Taanit Esther and the other minor fasts, the Sfaradim have the custom of the Shabbat before. Those minor fasts are announced. There's a achrazat somot.
Yeah.
Taanit Esther is
Taanit
not
they do
announced.
not. Okay, that's interesting. That would probably underscore the idea that we don't want to give it the same equivalence as the fast days that are from the prophets and the like. Yeah, yeah. So now I want to share with you a very interesting conundrum about Taanit Esther. Mamish, a contradiction. There is a book of the oral law, it's earlier than the Mishnah even, that's called Megillat Ta'anit. Nothing to do with Megillat Esther. Megillat Ta'anit is the scroll of fasting. Megillat Ta'anit, I think we talked about this about Hanukkah, but it's going to come up here again. Megillat Ta'anit was written around 100 years before the Chorban Beis Hamikdash, the Second Temple's destruction. Now, again, let's think about that for a moment. The Romans destroyed the Second Temple. The normal date that's given is 70 of the Common Era. Some say between 68 and 70. Let's go with 70 just to be simple. So 100 years before that is what? 30 BCE. 30 BCE, before the Common Era. The Mishnah was not written down, the usual, until 200 of the Common Era. So Megillat Ta'anit is 230 years before the Mishnah, 100 years before the Churban. It is actually the first work of what's called the oral law, the Torah Shemopeh, that was written down. Now, what is Megillat Ta'anit? So Megillat Ta'anit was initially like a one-page document that eventually got expanded. It essentially was a calendar of dates, a listing of many, many dates in the course of the year, over 30 of them, in which you are not allowed to fast. So Megillat Ta'anit is a little bit of a misleading name. It's not the scroll of fasting, it's really the scroll of non fasting. A list of days that you're not allowed to fast, and you're not allowed to eulogize the dead, because these are festive. And Megillat Ta'anit is a huge source of Jewish history, although it's very obscure, because a lot of them were connected to the Hanukkah miracles and various wars and events and notable. It's not a biblical chronicle, meaning it doesn't go to, like, it doesn't say in Megillat Ta'anit you're not allowed to fast during Pesach. Those are the Yomim Tovim of the Torah. These are not the Torah's Yomim Tovim. These are later events that became days of celebration. The only familiar ones that are in there is Hanukkah and Purim are mentioned in Megillat Ta'anit, but a whole bunch of others are as well, 28 other different types of things. Now, if you go through Megillat Ta'anit, you come across a very fascinating thing that's going to strike you a little bit. It says, oh, the 13th of Adar is a day that you are not allowed to fast, and you're not allowed to eulogize. The 13th of Adar, under the book Megillat Ta'anit, was a day of simcha. Now, why is that so? Listen to this. Nothing to do with Mordechai, Esther, or Purim. It goes back to the time of the Hasmoneans, the Hashmonaim, and in one of Antiochus's campaigns, there was a general called Nicanor, and Nicanor was planning a great siege against Jerusalem, again, during the Antiochus era. Actually, this is actually after the Hanukkah story, but this was a return attack, after the Hashmonim established. And Nicanor was defeated and killed in a very miraculous way. So that day became known, the 13th of Adar became known as Yom Nicanor. And Yom Nicanor is a day that we were not allowed to fast and we were not allowed to eulogize the dead. Now, again, remember your history here. This is after the Purim story. The Purim story occurred during the 70 years of exile between the first temple and the second temple, towards the very end of that period. In fact, Achashverosh's son from Esther, Daryavesh Hasheni, was the one who indeed authorized the rebuilding of the second temple. So the story of Purim is right before, shortly before the rebuilding of the second Beis Hamikdash. Now, Yom Nicanor is the story of it's really a post Maccabee story. And once again, that's many, many years later. So the problem is this: there seems to be a disconnect here. How can there be a fast day that's called Tanis Esther if under Megillat Ta'anit it's Yom Nicanor and you're not allowed to fast on that day? Now, and it's especially problematical because the people who decreed Tanis Esther are way later. They're the Gaonim. Right? So weren't the Gaonim bound by the declaration in Megillat Ta'anit? By the way, we have a similar problem, which I'm not going to talk about today. Tzom Gedalia. It's recorded. Megillat Ta'anit says the third of Tishrei is supposed to be a holiday for other reasons, right? So Tanis Esther and Tzom Gedalia, 2 days that we fast, are actually declared holidays in Megillat Ta'anit. So in order to answer this conundrum, you need to understand a fundamental machlokas in the Gemara itself. And this is a machlokas, batla Megillat Ta'anit, o lo batla Megillat Ta'anit. There is an opinion in the Gemara that says that the festive days of Megillat Ta'anit were only observed as festive days as long as the temple was standing and we were in a time of joy. Once the Chorban Beis Hamikdash occurred, the festive holidays in Megillat Ta'anit were no longer observed, which is why if you look at all sorts of dates, in the middle, there are plenty of days that we eulogize and can fast that are listed as that. So if I hold Batla Megillat Ta'anit, it's really no problem because Einochinami. Tanis Esther is a post Chorban Beis Hamikdash fast, and post Chorban Beis Hamikdash Batla Megillat Ta'anit. So that would be a simple answer. By the way, I hate to take away the legitimacy of so many beautiful, beautiful Torah thoughts, but listen to this. This is going to be a litvish Torah that's going to be very dry to you, but I want to share it with you. That is, everyone knows the famous saying that all of the holidays are going to be nullified, except for Purim. So people will give beautiful speeches, which they should continue to do, about how beautiful Purim is, that Purim is even more important than Pesach, Rosh Hashanah, Sukkot. But the truth of the matter is, many understand that when it says all the holidays are going to be nullified, it does not mean the Torah holidays. The Torah holidays you'll always have, but it means all of the quasi holidays of Megillat Ta'anit are nullified, except for Purim, because Purim indeed remains. Right, so it's referring to very specifically to Megillat Ta'anit. Now, the only question is, there is another opinion that says the Megillat Ta'anit calendar is not nullified and it's still binding. So I would just have to conclude that if you followed the view that Megillat Ta'anit is still binding, there could not be Tainus Esther, meaning Tainus Esther's very existence can only exist because we paskin, the calendar of Megillat Ta'anit became nullified after the Churban. Now, so you might say, well, gee, so I like that other opinion better, right? Well, the issue is though that you can't really pick and choose. Meaning, if you follow the view that Megillat Ta'anit is not batel, you would have another like 30 days of the calendar that you wouldn't be allowed to eulogize the dead or whatever it would be. But we actually paskin all of Megillat Ta'anit is nullified, except for the references to Hanukkah and Purim that remain. Okay, so this is an interesting point that the day that became a fast day is, in point of fact, a day that was Yom Niknor under Megillat Ta'anit. Now, Megillat Ta'anit, as I say, it really was written in two stages. The initial stage was literally a calendar. It says, on this day, don't do it. On this day, don't do it. On this day, don't do it, etc. Later, a commentary was added uh, to give the historical background. So the Megillat Ta'anit we have is a combination of the original text and the commentary on the text. But the commentary itself is very, very obscure, very, very bekitzur. And to this day, historians sharply debate what exactly are the events that it's referring to. It refers to all sorts of events, and it's very difficult to correlate it uh, to history. Some of them are Hasmonean events, some of them are events with the Romans, some of them are events with the Persians. Things are not defined that clearly. And as I say, Megillat Ta'anit is a hugely important source for Jewish history, but the exact interpretation of the events are not clear. It's a very obscure book. The Gemara, the Gemara does not give you the whole text. The Gemara uses Megillat Ta'anit as a text that it will take snippets from, but the entire text is an independent manuscript. It's not in the Gemara itself. Okay, now I want to mention another very interesting obscure teaching. One of the svarim that we have, if you ever looked at a shas, so maybe you came across this just as a matter of either by accident or whatever, at the end, and this is just a matter of where it's printed, it makes no significance here, but at the end of Maseches Avodah Zarah, happens to be there, there's a bunch of things that are called Masechtos Ketanos, the minor tractates. The minor tractates, meaning the smaller tractates. And they include Maseches Sofrim, Maseches Samachot, Maseches Sefer Torah, Maseches Tefillin, Maseches Tzitzis, Maseches Gerim, and they are not part of the Talmudic cycle. So, for example, in Daf Yomi, these are not studied on a regular basis. So they're not really tractates of the Talmud. They are called minor tractates of the Talmud. They too were organized in the time of the Gaonim, and many of them are anthologies from Talmudic passages, embellished with other things. What exactly is their purpose? What exactly is their function? So it is very, very interesting. This actually connects a little bit to the Rambam. It was thought that this was the first partial attempt to reorganize the discussions of the Talmud into halachic manuals. Remember that, as the Rambam describes, that one of the big problems with Talmud, Gemara, is that Gemara is question, answer, free association. It doesn't give you bottom line, and a given subject is discussed in many places. So the laws of Shabbos are not only in Masechah Shabbos, but they're in Bava Kama, Bava Basra, and that's why the Rambam felt this need to give you a halachic manual. Now, the Maseches Ketanos are much earlier than the Rambam, and they only cover very few areas, but they are written like halachic manuals. So it was thought that the Maseches Ketanos were the first aborted partial attempt to organize the Babylonian and Jerusalem Talmuds, both of them in halachic manuals. But as I say, they're very, very, very partial. There is no Hilchot Shabbat. I mean, there is none of that. Yeah, but in the areas that they did, they tried to create halachic manuals. Be it as it may, though, Maseches Sofrim in particular, which is a manual about how to write Sifrei Torah and a manual of Kriyas HaTorah, is really an archaeological gold mine because it records many old minhagim that have become extinct. We don't even follow today. Nobody follows. Ashkenazim, Sfardim, Teimanim, nobody follows. But it gives you old minhagim that were done at the time, particularly the older minhagim of Eretz Israel. And it records the following minhag of Purim. It does not record Taanit Esther. It does not mention it at all, which fits the idea that the Gaonim came later. But it says that there are tzaddikim who fast after Purim, Monday, Thursday, Monday. A 3-day fast after Purim, not consecutively, but Monday, Thursday, Monday. Now, this minhag, as far as I know, for Purim at least, is an extinct minhag. But the question is, what's the basis of this minhag? So there are two ways of understanding it. First of all, there's a general idea that Monday and Thursday, for various reasons, are considered to be special days of divine grace, where we turn to God for extra mercy. That's why we have the longer Tachanun on Monday and Thursday. They are called Yemei Ratzon. And the second idea was that this was Lezecher, the fast of Esther, which was 3 days. But instead of making it 3 consecutive days, because that would be too hard, they tied it to Yemei Ratzon. And they did it after Purim instead of before Purim because they didn't want to mar the Purim celebration with the fast. So it's a very strange thing. So they push it after Purim. They make it 3 days, but not 3 consecutive days, a Monday, a Thursday, Monday. So that's one origin. In other words, one origin of this might be this was their reconstruction of a Taanit Esther. There is another svara that this has nothing to do with Taanit Esther, but this resembles the minhag of Bahav. Let's go over this again. Monday, Ashkenazim in particular, some Sephardim as well, have the minhag that the Monday, Thursday, Monday, after the Shalosh Regalim, Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkot, originally were fast days. Today, very, very few people fast, but they are days of slichot, where people say long, long prayers. This is called the fast of Bahav, and it's for Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkot. It's a little complicated when you begin it because, for example, Pesach, you don't begin it till Iyar. You don't do the fast during Nisan. And Sukkot as well, you don't do it until Cheshvan. So it's not right away. Shavuos, you can do it right away, the Monday, Thursday, Monday after Shavuos. This is the fast of Bahav. Why is there a fast of Bahav for the Shalosh Regalim? Because Ashkenazim were afraid that maybe you had too much of a good time on Yom Tov. Too much drinking, too much celebrating, too much happiness. Ashkenazim were not allowed to be happy too much. And therefore, there has to be an atonement for the Kalos Rosh, which is fasting. So originally, Bahav was fasting. And now, most people don't. Very few people fast. In fact, I don't know anyone who fasts, but I'm sure there are Yechidim. But even those who don't fast, many say Shlichos. Actually, many don't say Shlichos either, by the way. Even the Shlichos has dropped out. But officially, the Minhag Yerushalayim is to say Shlichos on Bahav. But it's interesting that Bahav is only for the Shalosh Regalim. Now, some have suggested that Maseches Sofrim is recognizing a minhag of Bahav, not because of Taanit Esther, but because of the Kalos Rosh, which actually makes a tremendous amount of sense because you figure if I need to have a fast, 3 fast days after Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot, because maybe I was behaving in too much of a levity manner, well, Kal V'chomer, actually, it makes perfect sense that the Bahav ritual should be observed after Purim. And some actually learn that is exactly what Maseches Sofrim is doing. Why that fell out, I don't know. Meaning, if we still keep Bahav, those who keep it, for Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot, why should it fall out after Purim? I honestly don't understand. But as I say, there is two ways of learning this difficult passage in Maseches Sofrim. Is it a version of Tanis Esther, or is it a fulfillment of Bahav? But this is just one interesting example of how Maseches Sofrim is a repository of very, very fascinating minhagim that kind of have become extinct. So that too is a very important source for the history of halacha. So Megillat Ta'anit is a source for history, Jewish history as a whole, and Maseches Sofrim is a source for the history of halachic practices that sometimes fell out of favor. In fact, Maseches Sofrim is actually the halachic source for the fast of the firstborn. It does not say in the Gemara that firstborn have to fast on Erev Pesach. We know that from Maseches Sofrim. That's a minhag that survived, right? So some minhagim have survived, some minhagim have not survived. Okay, all right. So that's a little bit that I wanted to talk about Tanis Esther because I say the fast is largely misunderstood. Another interesting point, though, about Tanis Esther is that Tanis Esther is actually the opposite of every other fast. Every other fast commemorates, I mean, putting aside Yom Kippur, but Tisha B'Av, 17th of Tammuz, Tzom Gedalia, 10th of Teves. Every fast day commemorates calamities, commemorates tragedies. Tanis Esther commemorates success. Esther, whether it's Esther fasting the 3 days or whether it's the Chayolim fasting, whichever the origin is, Tanis Esther, we achieve Nitzachon. God listens to our prayers, right? God is makabel our prayers. Now, this is why you have a very interesting idea um, that Purim of Yadalit should never be on Shabbos, right? The Purim Mishulash is only because the 15th of Adar is on Shabbos. The 14th of Adar, based on our calendar, can never be on Shabbos, but Purim can be on Friday. Right? Purim can be on Friday, and that's actually very difficult. Purim on Friday is a bit difficult. Of course, this year Purim is on Friday too, but a regular Purim can be on Friday. Uh, and Tanis Esther is going to be on Thursday. Now, people discuss the issue that normally you try to make a Tainus later, right? If the ninth of Av falls out on Shabbos, you make a Tainus later. Tainus Esther, you make earlier. And the Shem Shmuel says that when a fast is based on tragedies, you push it off as much as possible. But Tanis Esther is not a fast of tragedy. Tanis Esther is a joyous fast in many ways because it reminds us that HaKadosh Baruch Hu listens to our tefillos. And therefore, it's a fast that gives us chizuk, a fast that gives us encouragement, right? A fast that shows us that Hashem is a shomea tefillah. And as a result, therefore, there's no need to push it off to later. We can do it as early as we want. It's not like the ninth of Av, that is a fast of sadness and korban. Yeah, so the Mishnah actually says interesting thing that in the time of the Mishnah and for some time afterwards, if there were smaller villages that didn't have their own minyan for Megillah and they'd have to go to the towns, so Chazal were makil because they would go to the cities on Monday and Thursday. Those were market days as well. So Chazal allowed the Megillah to be read the Monday or Thursday, whichever one before Purim. So that actually means, depending on the day that Purim fell, Megillah could be read as earlier as the 11th of Adar, the 12th of Adar, the 13th of Adar, in order that the Kefarim, the small villages that didn't have minyanim, wouldn't have to make a separate trip for Purim. They would just come in on their market day and they could hear Megillah. Today, that's in Talmudic times that already was discontinued. Well, in those days there was no fast of Esther, right? So there was no fast. That's the thing. So Tanis Esther never coexisted with that Megillah schedule because by the time Tanis Esther was invented, they weren't doing that earlier Megillah Megillah reading. Now, a little halacha connected to that, which is Nogea this year. That is, um, optimally, of course, we should hear Megillah in a minyan. And the reason why that's important is Pirsume Nisa, we want to publicize God's miracle. You do it barabim, you do it in a multitude, and the like. But you are Yotze, even if you read Megillah or someone reads Megillah to you, be Yechidus, without a minyan. And normally, you make a bracha on it. Right? The brachos of Megillah are made even biyachidus. But the Gemara says the following: when do you make a bracha on reading the Megillah? Only when the Megillah is read in its proper time. But when you are reading Megillah not on the right date, you only make a bracha if you have a minyan. When you're reading the Megillah not on the right date, you only make a bracha if you have a minyan. Now, what does the Gemara mean? You're reading the Megillah not on the right date. So most commentaries say it is referring to something that's not relevant today. It's referring to villages that are hearing the Megillah on the 11th, the 12th, and the 13th. That's not the right date, even though they were allowed to hear it. So they only make the bracha b'minyan. But there is a machlokas about this year. This year, the date that is the normal Yerushalayim Purim is Shabbos. We don't read Megillah on Shabbos because of a gezerah of the Chachamim, lest you carry the Megillah and the like, just like lulav and shofar. So here, even in Yerushalayim, Shushan, right, which keeps Shushan Purim, even in Yerushalayim, we read the Megillah Thursday night and Friday, which is the 14th. So there are some shitos that maintain that that's reading the Megillah not in the proper time, even though that's the time we're supposed to read it. Ergo, if you live in Yerushalayim and you're hearing Megillah not in a minyan, some would actually paskin, some rabbanim will paskin, no bracha is recited. However, the majority opinion is that this is not called not in the right time, because when Tesvav, when Shushan Purim falls out on Shabbos, Friday becomes the proper time. So if you ask me halacha l'maisa, I will tell you that if anyone lives in Yerushalayim and you're going to be hearing Megillah b'Yechidus, should the Baal Koreh make a bracha or not make a bracha, I would paskin to make a bracha, because most opinions treat this as the proper time, and they say the Gemara is only referring to 11, Yud Aleph, Yud Beis, Yud Gimel for villages. But if you hear someone say the other way around, be aware that there is a shita to that effect. Yes, yes. Are there other cities in Eretz Yisrael that observe Shushan Purim other than Yerushalayim? So here's the thing: there is no other city that only observes Shushan Purim, but there are a number of cities that are treated as a safek, and they will some will observe it 2 days. Tveria, the Gemara discusses, may have had a wall from the time of Yoshua ben Nun. There's even issues in Ramot, which is part of Yerushalayim itself. Does Ramot keep Shushan Purim a regular Purim because it was far away from the old city walls? Um, even areas of Ramat Beit Shemesh, people are discovering, various issues. And by the way, even Chutz La'aretz, there was a view, or there is a view, that Prague is such an old city that they may have had a wall from the times of Yehoshua. That's how Yehoshua ben Nun had a wall. So there was a view, again, it's a minority view, that Prague had to read the Megillah on the 15th. Now the question is, what do we mean by a wall? I mean, what about the Great Wall of China? What if a whole country has a wall? The what? Okay, but again, according to Halacha, though, it has to be a wall that goes back to the time of Yoshua. Now, we don't mean you need the Yoshua wall. I mean, the old city also's wall is not from Yoshua, but it was a walled city from the time of Yoshua ben Nun. Yeah. Is for the reader or for the hearer? Well, it's for both, meaning to say. If the reader read before and then comes to read for someone yeah. Does he make the bracha a second time? So you can, either way is going to be acceptable, meaning to say, the same way the Baal Koreh could read the Megillah for you, the Baal Koreh could make the bracha for you, even though he was Yotze already. That you can do that, or alternatively, you can make the brachot, and then the Baal Koreh will read the Megillah. So either way is acceptable. By the way, I want to differentiate a little bit of a subtlety. When it comes to shofar blowing, that actually is not the case. I'll explain why. Meaning, if let's assume I'm blowing shofar for my wife. So I heard shofar already, or I blew shofar already. Now I'm coming home to blow shofar for my wife. There, she must make the brachot. I am not allowed to make the brachos for her. She must make the brachos. As opposed to Megillah reading, you actually have two options. The Baal Koreh can make the brachos, or the person hearing. Difference is the following. The difference is a woman is not obligated in shofar blowing. She's allowed to make the brachos, as even though she's not commanded, she's allowed to do it. But I cannot say the brachos again, because for me it would be a blessing in vain, since she has no obligation. So she has to make the brachos. Now, if I'm blowing shofar for another man who's chayav, then I could make the brachos again. Now, Megillah reading, men and women are equally obligated. So whether I'm reading the Megillah for a woman or whether I'm reading the Megillah for a man, I can make the brachos for them because they're obligated. Right? So you see how subtle halacha is. You got to pay attention to this. When it comes to shofar, it gotta be, if it's for a woman, the woman makes the brachos. When it comes to Megillah, you can have it either way. The woman can make the brachos, or the man can make the brachos.
Bracha at the end, the same halacha as the bracha at the beginning of the Megillah? In other words, is the bracha at the end of the Megillah? What about that one if you're only reading for one person?
Yeah, so that you still do. The bracha at the end you say as well. Yeah, you still say the bracha at the end as well. Okay, so this is a little bit of halacha here. Now, one final halacha I want to mention, interestingly enough, before we break, and that is Hallel. Hallel on Purim. Well, obviously, there is no Hallel on Purim. Right? Problem is, why not? We have a Hallel on all the Yom Tovim, of course. We don't have it. Okay, we don't have it Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. That the Gemara explains. Those are days of judgment, so we don't have the unrestrained joy of Hallel. But Purim is such a happy day. It's a Yeshua for Klal Yisrael. Why is there no Hallel? And even though Purim is rabbinic, it's not one of the Shalosh Regalim, but neither is Hanukkah. If there's Hallel for Hanukkah, then why shouldn't there be Hallel for Purim? So the Gemara gives a few answers, but I just want to focus for a moment on the answer that the Shulchan Aruch brings as the answer. And the answer the Shulchan Aruch brings from the Gemara is that you're Yotze Hallel through the reading of the Megillah. In other words, the Hallel of Purim is Megillah. Based on this, the Meiri says a fascinating halacha. The Meiri says, let's say you're stranded on a desert island and you have a sitter, but you don't have a Megillah, and it's Purim. You don't have a Megillah. You know what the Meiri says? You are obligated to recite a full Hallel with a bracha on Purim. Because what the Gemara is telling me is, really, Purim is chayav in Hallel, but you're Yotzei via Megillah. So if you don't have a Megillah, says the Meiri, you got to say Hallel. But we don't paskin like the Meiri. We actually paskin that not only is Megillah Hallel, Megillah is the only way you could do Hallel. You can't do Hallel through Hallel. You can only do Hallel through Megillah. Why is that so? Why wouldn't a real? So you're stuck. You're stuck in that. I mean, you can always say Hallel without a bracha because that's chapters of Tehillim, right? Yom Ha'atzmaut. People are often advised, depending on your psak, say Hallel without a bracha, whatever. But Hallel with the bracha you can't do. So why would real Hallel not be good? So Rav Hutner says a beautiful, beautiful thought. Rav Hutner says like this. He says, Hallel is thanking Hashem for the salvations that He brought us, but the nature of your Hallel has to correspond to the nature of the salvation. We have two types of miracles that Hashem does for us. We have what is called Nes Nigla. We have what is called the open supernatural miracle. The example of the Nes Nigla is, of course, Pesach. And even Hanukkah had aspects of Nes Nigla, the burning of the oil for 8 days. So, Purim, on the other hand, there actually is nothing supernatural. Everything in Purim is hidden. That's why the name of God is not mentioned. The story of Purim took place over 9 years. You think that's one thing after the other. It's a 9-year story. Slowly, gradually. Vashti gets killed. Esther becomes queen. Mordechai happens to overhear an assassination plot. Haman doesn't know the queen is Jewish and plans to destroy the queen's nation, that when she reveals that the king is really upset. If you're not a believer in God, a bunch of coincidences, a bunch of chance. That's why Hashem's name is not mentioned. That's why the word Esther itself is connected to Hester, concealment, hiddenness. That's why it's a Golos holiday. It happened in Golos, the only Yom Tov of the Golos. Sorry. I'm sorry, I don't hear you. Yeah, but it was on the way. I mean, Pesach was. Well, okay, okay. So here's what Rav Hutner says: an open, miraculous redemption has to be an open, explicit Hallel, which Hallel is. But a redemption that is hidden and concealed, we praise Hashem in a hidden and concealed way. Megillah, in which Hashem is controlling everything. So Rosh Chodesh, saying Hallel in Rosh Chodesh is a custom. It was not a chiyuv. That's why some don't make. The Rambam didn't make a bracha on it, and the like. So that's a minhag. That's not because of a miracle in particular, and that's why we don't paskin like the Meiri. Regular Hallel is not going to work for Purim, because regular Hallel is explicit and open, and Purim is hidden and concealed. But the greatness of Purim is to see Hashem in concealment, and that's a much higher art. To see Hashem when He does supernatural miracles, that's very obvious. To see Hashem in the Hester is the most difficult avoda, but that's Purim's gift to us, to understand that even when you think Hashem is not around, He's there. So wish you all a very happy Purim Mishulash, and be well.